It was just one of those memorable things that we often go back to. So that's the second mouse story. The third one is, as I mentioned Emily before, great mates with Kathy. They were the best of friends and still are, aren't you? And Kathy had a pyjama party and had all these little girls over. And as well as that, we had white mice, 2 mice, which Kathy was going to breed and sell at the pet shop. They ended up being Mickey and Mickey, so that didn't come off. So anyway, this night I left the girls alone. They'd had their spaghetti bolognese and their trifle, which they'd ordered, and they were in the bedroom having hijinks. The next thing I hear, they're squealing and yelling and carrying on. What on earth? I go in and all I saw was bottoms. All these bottoms here, head down, tail up, and all this squealing. One of the mice had got away. And if you've ever heard a whole lot of girls screaming. I'd had 2 boys before this. I didn't know what screaming girls did. So anyway, that was the third mouse one. So I would just like to say, in conclusion here, that this whole family, very close to me, like my sisters, my mother, my daughter, and I just want the very best for them. And so did Val. And I'd just like to say that, my prayer is that when Val comes back, every single one of us here in this room will be there to welcome her. Okay? Over and out. And I don't know who comes next. Oh, good.
Thank you, Gary. That was lovely. Mum would have loved it. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Beverly. If anybody enjoyed that, they can come back to Barbara's after, and there'll be a longer, slower, more paced version back at home. Mum's life was devoted to two things, her faith and her family, probably in equal proportion. And I was talking to Dana about our generation and after the war and how hard it was. There was very little food and there's very little goods. Not a lot of food on the table and not very much to choose from. Things came loose, there was nothing packeted, there was nothing frozen, plastic bags didn't exist. Potatoes came with dirt on and there was only one sort. Peas came in pods, beans came with their tops and tails on and their strings as well. Cauliflowers came in heads and pumpkins came in A. And they were Queensland blue. Mum used to take me to the shops in an old pram and load up all the groceries, and she'd do this 2 or 3 times a week because there was no freezers. And I'd be surrounded by Purcell and Lux Flakes and Queensland blue pumpkins. And in those days you could buy eggs by ones. That was really cool. 1 egg. You could buy 1 egg. Mum used to buy 3 eggs because it was Mum, Dad and me. And they'd be wrapped up by the grocer in a little tube. And she'd give them to me while I sat in the pram, and she'd say, hang on to these, not too tight and not too loose or you'll break them. I've been scared of eggs ever since. I'd sit there all the way home in the pram trying hard not to break the eggs. And they came with surprises. Because when you unwrap them, sometimes you got a little feather. Years later, I think she probably saved them all up and made her first eiderdown out of those feathers. They'd also come with a little bit of poo. They were good times, but things were tough. She was many things to many, many people. She was a housekeeper at a time when there were so many shortages. Our house was filled with scary things apart from my father. There was the gas copper which went woof, the gas stove that went woof, the gas geyser over the bath that went woof, the flip-down side of a toaster that you had to put your bread in and wait and turn it over. There was lots of scary things. The fridge was run by kerosene and so was the heater. And that's the way it was in those days. It was a fun place because we didn't ask for things, and when we did get given things, we said thank you and we appreciated what we had. Mum and Dad used to do the dishes together, and Dad would go deliberately fast to keep her slowly getting further and further behind while I was putting them away in the cupboard. Years later, in the Baptist nursing home, she had a couple of favourite sayings, one of which was, they like me here. And I said, that's okay, Mum. We all like you here. We love you. And her other saying was, and you know what? I don't even have to do the dishes. So it went into her psyche, those dish-dealing days. She cooked, she baked, she made something called flummery muck that has gone into our family psyche that Dad never sort of put much stead by because it didn't have any substance much. It was sort of a jelly flummery thing that she made. She made ice cream that bent spoons. She'd do the Sunday roast, and of course we got cold meat on Monday, and that was washing day because, you know, the cooking was already done, so washing got done that day in a copper with a big clothes prop thing that she used to haul the boiling sheets out of the copper and rinse by hand. Everything was done by hand. I was allowed to jump up and down in the rinsing tub water to make it rinse through, but I thought that was a huge thing to do when I was a kid, and she'd wheel me out to the line on top of the trolley. Of course, on Monday we had the cold meat, and Dad had come home, and in the very early days he looked at his plate at tea time and said, what do you call them? Mum replied, rissoles. Everybody knows that. But it's what you do with them, our Dad said. In 1997 they made a movie about that. Oh, and there's a pizza story too, which I'll regale you with in a minute. She was a seamstress, and I lied about just being family and faith being important to Mum. It was family, faith and the Pfaff sewing machine. Dad let her buy a Pfaff sewing machine because it was made with ball bearings and not one of this rubbish singamuck. No. So she had a Pfaff. So everything in our house that could be put underneath the foot pedal of the Pfaff sewing machine was zigzagged, because it was one of the very early machines that had zigzag. And in those days, when sheets got thin in the middle, you'd cut them down the middle, you'd bring the selvages to the side, She zigzagged down them, hemmed the sides, and they'd do for another year or two. And when they ran out, she made pillowcases out of the tops and the bottoms. And the same with the towels. When they got thin, they were face washers, zigzagged around the edge. Yes, and it was a very narrow thing in 1963. My sisters and I realised that we were very, very lucky. There was a very narrow escape because she used to also do things with the old curtains. She'd cut down the long ones and the short bits down the bottom would go up to make short curtains. And of course then The Sound of Music came out. Thank goodness she had changed to net curtains. And she thought that would be a little bit indecent to use those to make clothes out of. But we escaped. For relaxation, we went to drives to the airport to watch the planes land. Simple times. And we thought it was fabulous. We went for Sunday drives. And we went and watched Uncle Kevin race his motorbikes and sidecars around Lowood. Simple things. Rug making with Dad. These big hook rugs. Dad and Mum used to do them together in the lounge. Mum did them mostly, but when she went to make the supper and put the kettle on, Dad would take over and he'd yell out things like, "I've just punched the bum, love." And he'd be doing a koala in a tree or something as the pattern on these lovely woolly rugs. So he was a snag before his own time. But he rode motorbikes, so he's a bit of a bikie. But I think Mum rather liked that. Mum painted and she did cross-stitch and she was forever busy doing stuff. She showed all our clothes. I won't mention the red poplin swimsuit that filled up with air and made me swim across the pool looking like a monkey with a red bottom. I'm not traumatised, I'm fine. And of course it was zigzagged as well and it had lots of rickrack braid. Rickrack braid was very much in. Holidays, I must tell you a story about a holiday to Hervey Bay when Janie was a baby, 1953. Summer, hot, 38 degrees, boiling. Dad, for some reason, bought a little tiny Ford Prefect motor car, a little van with sides on, and Nana was alive then, and we had to crawl in over the passenger seat because he'd loaded all our luggage in the back, and he'd put a seat in there for her and bolted it down, and she was a rather round lady like this, like I am, and Dad would give her a goose up the bum to get in, and then I had to get in, and I'd sit in a little child's deck chair that swang like this. My claustrophobia and my motion sickness all stem from that trip up to Hervey Bay. And we stopped at Gympie and Janie and Mum got out, and we all got out climbing over. Dad was 6'3", so in this car he was like this. We had morning tea and by that time biscuits came in packets, so we had probably Monte Carlos and a cup of tea, and Mum fed Janie and we got back in the van and we'd gone about 100 yards and Janie threw up over everything. She was sitting on the front of Mum, in Mum's lap, you never do it these days, no seatbelts, no anything. No wet wipes, no cloth no disposable nappies, nothing like that. No, nothing like that. Just the smell in the back of the van. And my little Nana's going there, "It'll be all right, love." And it was a holiday from hell. Mum got sick, Dad got sick, we all got sick. And at the table, which is only about as big as this, we were sitting around one night all feeling terrible, and Dad said to Mum, "Pass the butter." And I felt it rather than knew what was happening. But something went past me like that, down past Dad's elbow, and hit the wall with a sort of a... And I looked over and Dad went... and the butter was just sliding down the wall. It had left the dish and had just gone sailing. So whenever we had overseers come to stay or were billeting people or we had guests at home and anybody said, "Pass the butter," Dad and I hit the deck and nobody had a clue as to why it was so hilariously funny. But that's what happened. She was a nurse, a carer and a benefactor more than anybody in this whole room, including us, really can appreciate. And it was at a time too when there was no bandages or band-aids or anything like that. She made bandages out of those sheets I was talking about. The doctor came to see me. You two had to go to the doctor. The doctor came to see me. But Mum's famous words, which always put fear into all of us, was when we had splinters, was, "I'll have to go and get a needle." Yes, she nursed us, she nursed everybody in the family. She nursed Nana, she nursed Em and Beck, Bep, she nursed, she attended to Kevin when he was ill, and Dad as well in his final years. She walked miles. She had no car. She went by public transport. She went up and down the hospital to visit me when I almost died. She went far beyond anything that I can imagine anybody else doing. And she loved us all, and she did it with love. This was all the time while she was recovering from cancer of the breast. She had double mastectomy, she had a mastectomy, she had a hysterectomy, she had a gallbladder removed. False teeth don't count. She had her corneas removed. And at one point I said to my two sisters, do you think she's trying to sneak off without us knowing? You know, but we realised that she was kicking on for a while yet. And she finally had a pacemaker, which was, in the last few days, a double-edged sword. She also helped pastorally her sisters in the truth and helped with donations and generous loans towards the building of the Kingdom Halls in Pickering Street, Grange and Arana Hills. Changes happened when Janie came along in 53. Things started to improve, and Janie takes complete credit for that, as she would. She came home from hospital at the same time a 2-bar radiator appeared, and I always thought that she got a sort of a baby and a free gift. Sort of, oh, okay, we've got a free radiator. It was already nice and shiny, and the little kerosene one got put to one side. I had to wait 2 years after Barbara was born to get a TV. That was in 1961, after I'd finished junior school. I left home in 1968, got married, left home, left the girls behind. Barbara was 9 and Janie was 15, and Mum continued her work in the faith and raising my 2 sisters. She did an okay job. There were challenges during this time that, as adults, we are now more philosophical about. By 1974, Janie was married. John and I left for overseas. Barbara got married, and sadly in 1980, Dad died. So within just a space of about 5 years, Mum was on her own. But she was tough. So when I came home for Dad's funeral, I had another holiday booked in the following year, and I came back and I took her off. And I took her to UK with me, and I paid for a lovely holiday for her, 5 countries in 21 days. And after she set off, I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? Because Mum was not a very social person. She came back a different woman. She was absolutely lifted. She was happy, she was smiling, she'd had such a good time. And of course, coming back home after that, it was a different chapter in her life. She got her licence. She got her licence. And the little yellow peril was seen all around the northern suburbs, except at the Pickering Street roundabout. She used to attend the Grange congregation then and had this very, very strange way of getting there via the Newmarket Pool, the Newmarket Railway Station, Wilston State School, and I think Alba Park Zoo was mentioned. But she avoided the Pickering Street roundabout. She used to pick up Em and Rebecca and Tom from Inogra School in Hillbrook. It's okay, Tom, you'll be all right. And take them home to her place for afternoon tea. It was only because we'd raised our children so well that when they got out of the car, they didn't kiss the ground. Being offered a lift by my mum was a double-edged sword. And I said I'd get to the pizza story, didn't I? After school, they'd often get little snacks before they got taken home, picked up. Tom hopped in the car one day and I said, how'd you go, love? And he said, oh, okay, Mum gave us afternoon tea. And I said, what was it? He said, we had pizza. I said, oh, that's nice. What sort? And he said, baked beans. Okay. Later there was, I think, a very good one that was tomato base with pineapple and green beans. That was nice. And there was one with green peas on, wasn't there? But with love, when something's cooked with love. But time passed, and as Alzheimer's took over and we were raising our children, it all just came at once, Mum became the one needing to be cared for. Luckily, and perhaps ironically, for the last 4 years, she's resided at the Baptist nursing home, where she was loved and cared for. Even so, about a year ago, she resolved that she would marry Eddie. I told you, Janie said that she had these romantic persuasions. She was going to marry Eddie, as a resident in the home, and they were going to knock through the wall between their rooms. The fact that he lived downstairs made no sense, but she was going to knock through the wall, they were going to get married, and they were going to go out on the work together. Yes, so even in her state of very, very mental decline, she was going to go out on the work together. I hope I've painted a very quick picture of what life was like with our mum. It was lovely, and Dad and Mum formed a very lovely and loving partnership, and we shall miss them both. We shall miss them both a lot. With Alzheimer's, families and carers grieve every day for their loved ones who have gone, and it's a terribly cruel, horrible disease. Mum was a loving and giving woman and a faithful servant of Jehovah. Mum passed away in the hope of a resurrection to a paradise earth, and you could not find a more deserving person. We will lovingly keep Mum in our hearts and in our conversations and our minds. And yes, you've turned off the gas and you've turned off the stove, you've turned off the lights, you've locked the back door. Yes, we are right for money. And yes, we will watch out for traffic on the way home. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm number two's daughter, one of them, Jeanette. I like to say Jeanette whenever I can. Grandma and I were always very close. This probably stemmed from the fact that it was 7 years after I was born before my sister Emily and cousin Tommy came along. And although I did spend a lot of time in those days playing with my oldest Whittaker cousins, I was an only child for some time and quite an alone one, and I think Grandma could see that. So we were bonded, maybe because I was the first grandchild, maybe because our August days were very close together. I was quite sick as a child as well, so Grandma spent some time in the hospital with me, or maybe because I had her brown eyes. But as our family grew, and we can thank the Whittakers for that, my grandma became grandma to 10 of us in total, with the final addition of twins to our cousin mix. Unfortunately, this was the worst kept secret, thanks to Catherine bursting out the news to me on the red monkey bars at school, and of course me going straight home to Grandma's house that afternoon, and bursting out with great dramatic flair that twins were on the way. Well, Grandma looked at me with complete scepticism and disbelief, because it wasn't long before that Stephanie had arrived. And even though I reiterated to her that Catherine had told me, she wasn't going to budge. So poor Catherine told me a week later that it was supposed to be a secret and she wasn't in the good books at home. I did feel a little bit guilty. I stole the thunder a little bit. But the following June, I think, Charles and Elizabeth made their entrance, proving that more is indeed more, and that our family hearts are ever expanding. I have spoken to Catherine this week, whose heart and ours is a little heavy that she cannot be with us here at this special time. But we are thinking of each other from here all the way to Utah. Grandma was a terrifically loving and caring grandmother, although she was quite possibly the worst player of cards and board games of all time. Either that or she was incredibly wily and cunning to ensure that children always won. I would eat spoonfuls of raw sugar straight from the sugar bowl right before I was due to be picked up. Perhaps this was a deliberate strategy to reinforce the sweetness of life at Grandma's house, or secret fun that I was hyped just before being returned to my mother. We would go on day trips to the city and shop in our best dresses and eat special sweet treats. Roast dinners were delicious on Sunday, and breakfast in bed was the norm. A 2-course breakfast in her bed, lying on our European sheepskin in the wintertime, was an unbeatable combination. We would walk around the garden, picking an arrangement for the table that included dandelions, pussycat whiskers and pom-poms. And she would empty the tree of mandarins using a rake. No fruit would make it back to the kitchen, as we were too full, gorging ourselves on mandarins sitting on the chair outside the doll's house that grandfather had built. She would pick up Emily, Tommy and I from our school in her treasured yellow Peril Corolla whenever she was needed, which was quite a lot. In the afternoons, she played the piano for us to dance to once we became too big for her to dance us standing on her feet. And then she played for my entire ballet class, which elevated me to exclusive status by association. On occasions, I was allowed to try on her shoes from the seemingly massive shoe cupboard, proving to me that it's pointless to fight genetics now, as I look at my own seemingly massive shoe cupboard 30-something years later. Grandma aged, but like a seemingly universal truth that applies only to grandparents, which is that they never seem to age in their grandchildren's eyes. Tommy and I looked at old photo albums of Grandma's one afternoon a few years back, which Auntie Barb had created with much love and much tape. Aunties with skills. And realised that our grandma had seen more of Australia and visited more countries than we had.